Seychelles Forex Lick.
Hey everybody, it's Tracy, and in my continuing series about Forex licensing in light of unlicensed Forex jurisdictions like St. Vincent putting the clamp down, I wanted to talk about Seychelles. And up until a few years ago, Seychelles was sort of not an option because it was blacklisted due to repeated AML, KYC issues within their financial system and the like, but has since moved off that and is once again open for business. And the only, real issue with like blacklisting is like you're not going to get any sort of banking or payment provider outside of Seychelles. And for like Forex, it really doesn't work, right? Like the few banks there don't necessarily accommodate Forex business in like the B2B, B2C capacity that you need. They certainly don't handle payment processing very well. So they're back, and it is a fairly good option. I don't know if it's better than like a Mauritius, but it is an option, right? And in terms of like global scope, it's essentially the same, right? You always have the optics issue that I talk about a lot in terms of like whether more established, larger investors, traders, or like institutions would want to jump on to a broker that's licensed in Seychelles, and that's kind of up for debate. I think it's getting better, but it's perhaps not the best optically. But it's definitely an option, and it's definitely a low-cost option, like with capital requirements of only $50,000, which, it's not blocked capital, it's not a deposit. You show it, you take it out, you use it, you do whatever you want to do with it. But that's sort of the minimum. And, the process is very similar. It'll take about 3.5 months. I imagine in any jurisdiction, as I'm seeing, it's going to start taking longer because so many people are applying for licenses. And there's been some talk about, even in Seychelles, about closing applications because even though they're getting more license applications, they're not necessarily like enhancing or growing their regulatory review departments, right? So you have the same amount of people now handling probably 2-3 times the volume. So to say like 3 months, it's perhaps not right, but you don't know. So everything's pretty much the same, like that you'll find in like a Vanuatu, Mauritius, anywhere in terms of like information you have to get on business plans, audited balance sheet, extensive KYC, policies and procedures, customer agreements, the whole thing that you need anyway to operate, probably with the exception of the business plan. But there's two sort of nuance to it. One is a professional indemnity cover, right? So like a errors and omission policy, right? Which most jurisdictions don't necessarily require. And in Seychelles, it's very minimal, right? It's typically 50,000. But to find a insurance broker that will offer that isn't the easiest thing in the world. Obviously, nobody in the States or UK will offer it, but within the Seychelles, you can find people to do it. And it's typically not very expensive, a couple $1,000s at most, right? And it's a renewable cost in the sense that every year you're gonna have to pay that $2,000. So you need that, which is unique compared to like a Mauritius, right? Which doesn't require it. You may want it, but it's not required. And beyond that, the treatment with which you show the capital requirement can be different, right? What you have is, what they want to see is a chain of custody from a shareholder of the company to the company. So in the sense that the money, is deposited into Seychelles or anywhere else, right, account in that company's name, what they want to see is the 50,000 or however much more come from one of the UBOs, right? From one of the officers, directors, 10% owners of the company into that account. So typically like that requires showing them the FSA a paper trail of the 50,000 moving from shareholder A to the company's account, which can be a wire receipt or something like that. And lastly, well, not required, I guess in part and partial because of the fact that Seychelles was, for some time blacklisted. There's sticklers about certain odd things for whatever. And like I've talked about it multiple times before, the, economic substance piece is big anywhere, and like you're not going to get away from it really anywhere except for the United States, oddly. But as it relates to the Seychelles, you know, your office and like one or two admin employees is by definition and by the regulations there sufficient. Best practices would suggest that one of the individuals who are like C-level, particularly your compliance officer, right? None of whom have to be in the Seychelles would obtain a work or residency permit in the Seychelles, right? And that, while you're never probably going to go there, you know, it's a nice place, you can visit there, whatever, it just is indicative to the regulators, and I've seen it be beneficial in the sense that it's a greater showing perhaps for economic substance. And the process isn't terribly difficult, it's not terribly expensive, and you can run it concurrently, because it'll take about 2.5 months. You can run it concurrently with getting the license. So by the time the licensing decision comes down, you have this residency or work permit available that you can just add to the application supplement, and in turn sort of assuage them or give them further confidence that you know what you're in fact doing. So while not required, it's probably like sort of a best practices type thing. As far as the license goes, you know what, it's not unlike a Vanuatu or Mauritius. It's very broad, right? Yes, like your delineation of what you do is going, you know, in terms of like your application may say Forex or CFDs or whatever the case may be. But as a securities dealer license, you really have the ability to engage in any activity related to securities, commodities, what have you. Your prohibition being you can't do business within Mauritius or to people, or I'm sorry, Seychelles, or to people who live in the Seychelles. So other than that, you know, it's not a bad alternative. And I think like nowadays you kind of have to balance the perceived like turnaround times of regulators, because there's so many people now going to apply for Forex. So it's worth looking at, right? Because like I've said a million times, you're never going to stay. Like if you grow, right? If you build that brand, you're probably not going to stay in Mauritius, Vanuatu, or Seychelles. You're going to like graduate to a higher tier, to a Cyprus, to somewhere in the EU, to the UK if you get big enough, to the US if you get massive. So it's not necessarily, you know, where you start, it's where you finish. So, and Seychelles is generally speaking a good place to start. So if you have any questions, hit me up, adam@adamtracy.io, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.